On this episode of NorCal News Now, we're speaking with Butte County District 1 Supervisor Bill Connelly. I'm your host, Mike Richmond.
And I'm your co-host. Sorry, I'm not the co-host. I'm the political consultant, Aaron Haar.
You're co-host and consultant. You're co-consultant.
I'm Politico Aaron Haar.
Politico, that's good enough. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay. Well, our guest on today's show is incumbent Butte County Supervisor for District 1, a position that he's held for 13 years. In fact, many of those years, he was the chair of the Butte County Board of Supervisors. He's also been a small business owner who sits on the board of the Salvation Army and serves as chair of the Butte County Association of Government, along with several other associations and committees. And as a supervisor for the Oroville region, Bill has become famous as a critic and watchdog of the California Department of Water Resources, the DWR, the organization which oversees the Oroville Dam. Now, as most residents of Northern California and even citizens across the country know, a year or so ago, the dam became famous when heavy rains and ill-advised water strategies eroded the dam spillway and even put the dam itself in danger. Oroville and several other communities downstream on the Feather River evacuated until the danger passed. So, to talk to us now about this and his work, making Highway 70 safer, got a lot to get to today. We're happy to welcome Bill Connelly to NorCal News Now.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to give my side of the story.
Very good. Thanks, Bill. Sorry for that long intro, but I wanted to make sure we appropriately introed you on the show so the viewers out there know about you.
I appreciate that.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Our pleasure. Well, on the show, we try to, of course, we take a deep dive into policies and issues and all that good stuff. We also like to kind of get to know our guests on a little more of a human and a personal level. So on that note, what is it about your job that you most look forward to doing every day?
Helping people.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. If somebody calls and they have neighbor problems or there's objects in the road or they need a snowplow or they're being impacted by their neighbor's behavior, I like to help people. Or they have problems with government. I really like to find out. There's generally two sides to a story, but sometimes the public is treated wrong, and I like to right those wrongs. And I just enjoy helping people on a day-to-day basis. That's the easy part of the job, not the most challenging, but the easy and the fun part and the most rewarding. There's a dichotomy in your job. I mean, you're one of five over a $500 million budget. It's actually over that now. We have 3,000 employees in several different departments. Last time I counted, 11 unions that we deal with. All of that is challenging, but the most rewarding personally, beyond helping people for me, is the type of education it requires. You're always re-educating yourself on land use issues, transportation issues, water policy, state, local, even federal. Water policies are important. And I really like that challenge and the education that goes with that. I enjoy reading and learning and getting the background to do that. So on a personal level, it's helping the individual. On the 50,000-foot level, it's the education and a challenge to learn at all times.
Even after 13 or almost 14 years, we said, of you doing this, you're still learning things. You're still curious about how to serve the district and the community and do this work.
Oh, yeah. The last thing I did was I'd always known that there was problems with the relicensing of the dam and how the public had been treated and so forth. And I'd read some of the bulletins that were put out by the state and the promises, basically what they do to the community. I read all the relicensing documentation because I was involved with it for a couple of years before I ran. So I went back and I read every single thing I can find online, everything my aide could find, any university, anywhere we could find it, DWR's archives, and read all that to give myself this. It's like bringing water and fertilizer to the crop, right? Get the old brain full of what actually really happened, and it gives you a huge and different, I'd say not huge, but a different perspective on the apathy that we've had towards DWR and the water contractors and our treatment of us up here.
You represent a large district within the county, running from Polga to Concal and north to Palermo to Huncut in the south, including the county seat of Oroville. How do you ensure you understand the needs of all the diverse constituency, not only in your district, but in other districts as well that you're kind of representing from that seat?
Well, I've always said and meant it that I put my district first in being able to understand people. That's why we have districts. I need to understand people from timber to rice land, from a city to 7 unincorporated little communities. And so I try to go out on every year or two. I go visit the smaller communities, and I try to stay in tune with people. Unfortunately, I always have the biggest problems, like the most fires, the biggest danger of flood, the most marijuana being grown that's upsetting people, you know. But I do know my constituents well. I will dabble in somebody else's district if it's for the betterment of the entire county. But I don't try to go into somebody's district and do the day-to-day issues. That's why we have districts. If somebody has a problem with a bump in the road and they call me from another district, I'll refer them back to their supervisor. But if I feel it's something minor they wouldn't mind, I'll help them, right? You know. But there is a reason we have districts, and I think it works well. We stay there, we get to know our people, the more knowledge we have. And, you know, again, you don't realize how diverse my district is as I start naming it. I mean, I have Yankee Hill, Concal, Berry Creek, Forbstown, Clipper Mills, Bangor, Honcut, Palermo, you know, the city of Oroville, Kelly Ridge, and I'm missing a few. You know, I'm doing it really quick. Cherokee comes to mind. So it's fun to get to know all the diverse people and their needs and wants.
As supervisor, I know that it's a really a kind of a nonpartisan seat. I mean, it's not Democrats, not Republicans. You guys are supervisors for the entire community. But how would you describe yourself as an elected official? And what I mean by that is, what would you say would be your operating principle as a politician, as a person who represents individuals in the district? And what would you describe your temperament as a supervisor to be?
I try to be fiscally conservative. I try to make sure that taxpayers never in trouble in the future. That's been challenging, especially with the retirement costs that have come and are going to come in the future. I've always been a registered Republican. I don't play real hardball partisan politics because I don't believe that serves me well in serving my public. And I've never asked a person what their party is if they come in my office or ask me a question. I think I've garnered support from Green Party members, Democrats, Libertarians, and Republicans because I put my constituents first. My job as a local representative is not to get too tangled up on state or national issues that don't impact my people. Now, I have personally very strong beliefs that don't come up at my level of government, so I don't talk about them. I don't bring it up. That's between me and my fellow conservatives to argue about or something. But I hope that explains what I do and how I treat my office. We've been pretty much on a balanced budget for all these years. It's been difficult. I remember when we took a pay cut. Everybody forgets the Board of Supervisors took a pay cut in front of our employees because we thought that was a good example. And funny, years later, you get that back as the judges get a raise, and everybody forgets the part where we stood in front and took the 5%. That was a tough thing to do, ask your employees to take a pay cut. We asked them to go 7 years without any wage or benefit increases. I was well aware of that. I'm a working guy, you know, and but to keep it in a balanced budget, we had to do what was necessary, and that's working with diverse people as Jane Dolan and Larry Wall. Kim Yamaguchi and now Doug Teeter. It was who was it? Kurt Josiason, and now I got Steve Lambert. And Maureen Kirk, I love her to death. And Marianne Howks. Oh yeah, Marianne. We got along well, and we always the county's always had a balanced budget all these years because of that. That's important. Beyond that, I have compassion towards people. I think it's great that we have Maureen on there. Has a lot of compassion towards people, where I'm probably more pragmatic about it. Mm-hmm. She has a really big heart and love her for it. But we want to help people that are truly in need. And then, again, it's balancing what it costs, you know, to us as a society and us as a taxpayer. I think that kind of says who I am.
And I think that that's a good point, because I mean, you mentioned this is a really diverse area right here. I mean, certainly there's a lot of conservatives, a lot of liberals, and people on, way on the either side of that spectrum too, and people meet in the middle too. And I think that you're right. Nobody likes to pay taxes. Sure. I mean, we all want to keep our taxes low if we can, and we all want to be as fiscally responsible as we can. But you alluded to it. I mean, you also have to help people. I mean, that's what the job entails, is helping people in the area, in the district. So how do you balance those things? I mean, how do you say, well, we're going to spend some money, and maybe we even want to raise more money because we need more money to do things like infrastructure, civil servants, or helping people that maybe need help that are at the lower end of the economic scale. How do you balance all those things, and how do you make those decisions about what the priorities are?
My priority is your safety. I think, number one, anyone should be able to expect that their significant other and themselves should be safe. Children should be safe. Grandchildren, grandparents should be safe. So I've always leaned towards making sure we could give the sheriff as much as he could need. We need a new jail. I mean, there's just not enough room. The jail's inadequate because they've turned it into a state prison, a county prison, excuse me. There needs to be mental health and education offered there because people stay there longer now. That's important. So I always put that as a priority, and that gets me a little sideways with any other function of government that we have to cut. Remembering that the welfare system, probably improper to use that term, but that's run by the state. Most of the money comes from the state and is mandated by the state. We're simply handlers of the money. We pass it through. So we don't directly cut back or do anything there. Where we have to look is police, fire, probation, the jail, the libraries, administration is where we have the most discretion. Then there'll be public works and development services. We have discretion. Remembering everything else, mental health, and all that's pretty much mandated money, and it's a pass-through. So I think I answered your question. I always put your public safety first, and everything else we got to prioritize how we cut it. People get upset with that, but I think we expect that of government. That's why we have government, because there are bad people out there that do stupid and bad things. Why, I don't know. I mean, you can tell them over and over and slap them on the wrist, not physically, and they go out and do it again. But I think that's what we all want of our government. We want to be safe. So I'll stay there.
What do you think about the idea that here in Chico, I don't know if it's throughout the whole county, but here in Chico, at least I understand now that the police are working hand in hand with social workers to kind of walk through some of these situations and work hand in hand with these social workers to try to mitigate some of these situations where you may have somebody who's mentally ill, who is maybe having an issue, and maybe the social worker will help ameliorate that problem rather than the police. Is that a good idea, do you think?
Absolutely. I think that police officers are under a tremendous amount of stress, pressure, and oversight at all times. Remembering most of them are really dedicated to their job and do a great job, and a few mess up. They're under continuous mental pressure, and I'm not condoning any type of shooting or overstepping by the police, but they're not trained as well as a mental health expert would be, and maybe it's a client they've seen. So to be able to afford to have, if there's a mental health crisis, to have somebody there that could counsel the person or knows them or understands how they think, it should help the police and our society and those mentally ill people that are in that situation. I think it's a good pilot program. If we have the funding, I'd like to see it go countywide. But remember, the sheriff is an elected official with his own, he's constitutionally protected. The board doesn't tell him what to do. I think Corey, though, is a very progressive and mindful sheriff, and he'd probably like to do it too, but I'm not speaking for him.
You talked about the budgetary issues of homelessness, and you have a lot of homelessness in your district. To label a really broad term, I mean, you have some mental health people, you have some veterans, you have some people down on their luck from fires and whatnot, people displaced. But it seems like, from what I'm hearing from you, you also represent those people as well, and you seem to have well, you seem to take them under the umbrella too as well in some of your decisions. Is that fair that they are represented by you too?
They are, but there's a point. The pendulum has swung from, in my opinion, what research I've done, in the 1960s, we institutionalized somebody because we thought they drank too much, or they had, they were upset at their children or whatever. We'd put them in a mental hospital. It was crazy. But, the pendulum has swung so far that the mentally ill are not, the seriously mentally ill cause a lot of crime. And they're the people we have the most problem, but we don't have beds for them. So I think as a society, we need to pay the money, build the bed space, get them the counseling and make them take their medication if necessary, get them off the streets and keep them safe and keep society safe. And that's a hard decision for us to do because right now you can't, where do you draw the line? Which person do you say, hey, get off the street? Well, I think it's a person you arrest 3 times in a day and let go. Probably need to be in a place that's safe for them and us. And we need to spend the money to do that. And all these other things, we're trying. Everybody's trying. It's like one church is doing this, a group of churches is doing that. The city council's passing these rules, and I don't want to get in the weeds, but the county provides mental health services to the best of our ability with the funding we're given. We're having a very difficult time hiring the experts to help people. They're very limited, and they get a lot of money. Because they're limited, it's a cost and demand. So I think the hardest question for local citizens and local politicians to really answer is how do we convince state and federal people to start building these institutions, even if they're small in size, in our communities where we can get these people off the streets, get them the medical need, the help, and help our society be safer and be safer for them. I just don't see anybody taking that on. I just don't. There's no place. For example, we have people show up at the hospital, right? There's no bed space for them, especially a minor. And they could be a violent minor. And that's a terrible thing for the hospital now. And it's a terrible thing for us, and it's a terrible thing for their family. And we don't have that bed space. And I think you would see a dramatic... I was at a seminar where they told what a dramatic change it was to community when they got the 5 worst mentally ill homeless that created crime every day off the street because they had a safe place to put them and they had supervision and a judge-ordered medication if necessary, how their crime just completely stopped. Because most homeless are out of sight, out of mind, aren't even bothering it. They've always been here. Some people choose to be homeless, and they don't bother people. I'm off of that. And veterans, hell yeah, let's give them a place to live. I'll do anything to help a veteran. We need to help them.
Based on Plato, I think you're right. Yeah,
yeah, there you go.
Well, I think we want to get into your wheelhouse now, and that's the dam.
Say.
Well, Bill, I wanted to ask you about the evacuation, and I was wondering if you could tell us about how that went down in your district and just sort of the timeline and how the events went down.
Well, first off, before the evacuation, I was warned by former DWR employees that the emergency spillway was never meant to be used. It was made to collapse over in case of a catastrophic failure or a 1,000-year event. Say Lake Almanor failed. That was to spill water till the non-compacted dirt washed away. It would flash flood down, but save the dam. So I was on Facebook warning people that God's in charge if they use the emergency spillway. And I did a little math on a napkin and figured out it was going to go over the emergency spillway. So I was really concerned. Most people didn't share my concern. So it was really surprising when the CAO of the county called me and said, Bill, I got to tell you something. You got 30 minutes to an hour and a half to evacuate. I'm moving everybody to Chico. You gotta get out of here. And I'm going, Paul usually was a very calm person. I said, I got to get off the phone. He goes, why do you got to get off the phone? I said, I'm calling my parents. They're 80 years old. They live in Biggs. And from there, I made the decision. I didn't think I'd flood. I couldn't get a flood inundation map. They evacuated my neighborhood out of abundance of caution, which Corey was right to do. But I put a ladder up on my roof, and I stayed there at the computer and the phone and made sure my relatives could move. And then I got a call. They're not letting us go east. So I called Corey, the sheriff. He was under duress. I could tell. He's going, Bill, I got to get off here. And I said, please, you got to let people go east. So the Highway Patrol within 5 minutes called me and said we are allowing people to go east, which was a change. Because my own family, they're trying to make them go to Chico from Thermalito when my sons live up in the foothills and they're entirely safe there. So it was a pretty stressful night. My wife was pretty, she usually doesn't get very nervous, but she's worried. I said, you can go up that ladder. It'll be okay, But I don't want to make light of it because a lot of people were so scared and so impacted. And I had a town hall where everybody could come and vent, which was a good thing. And I'd really like to see some compensation for that evacuation because it truly was caused by this lack of institutional knowledge by the white hats or the head guys of DWR, not knowing how the dam was designed or how it was built, and making, they could have used it briefly. They could have shut the other one down and checked it. But in the end, it was going to fail. It was doing exactly what it was built to do. So that's my perspective on it.
And how about the evacuation plan? I mean, do you think there was an evacuation plan in place that had been really thought through, or was that kind of cobbled together a little bit at the last minute?
No, Corey had to make a huge decision, draw some lines, because there wasn't, but there is now. Corey's done Corey Hoyne is who I'm referring to, the sheriff, has worked with CAL FIRE, who's good at those type of things because of fires, and DWR, and they've come up with a plan that would do different scenarios if it was just a spillway or if it was the whole dam or whatever. The only evacuation plan or anything I could find was back to 1986. It was a catastrophic event. And again, fortunately, my house would have been on high ground. It would have flooded around me, but not right there. I live right by Las Plumas High School. So, yeah, that plan's in place now. It's hard to say this enough. DWR, I don't dislike them as people. I like people, right? Everyone I meet I like, but just their institutional arrogance and their lack of acknowledgement that this thing could break or could fail or do something wrong. The grass growing through the cracks, beating on it with chains and hammers and calling that a forensic study. They got us to where we were. And then the operations of the dam, 185% of the snow at that time. Warm rain coming. What did they think was going to happen? Inflows of 350,000 cubic feet per second. You're going to be using that spillway. They probably would have been close to emergency spillway if it had rained one more day. I think they would have lost it anyway. One more day of rain would have been catastrophic.
So with regard to water, what do you think that Butte County is doing right, and what do you think that we could be doing better?
Okay, so under Sigma, where we're studying our groundwater, Butte County is ahead of most counties in the state. We have a great scientist, Christina Buck, that is really looking at the Tuscan, the upper and lower Tuscan and alluvial, and finding that it's just not this big monolithic lake that the rest of the state looked at, because frankly, they would like us to sell all our surface water rights south, and they'd like us to depend on our groundwater, or they'd like us to do some sort of conjunctive use. I've heard this out of DWR scientists' mouth, that we'd like to have you, in time of drought, pump your groundwater because you stored it and send more of your surface water south. So finding out exactly what's where and how much of it's there and how often we can exercise or use it is very important. So that part of our water policy, we're really strong. We're in a 6-county MOU because that's what the state requires to apply for grants. And we're doing that, and we've just received over $1 million and are ahead of the curve. As far as policy with the dam or DWR, our relationship there, it's been 50 years of abuse by DWR. I mean, the veil of apathy comes down over the public. They forget so quickly. You need to go back and read all the documents, understand that when the water bonds were, I would do this briefly as I can, when the water bonds were passed, it barely passed in the state. It was like 53%. This is Pat Brown. This is in the beginning. Butte County was, and Yuba County, I've heard both ways, but I think only the two of us north of Sacramento voted for it. And this great transfer of water came about, but none of the infrastructure promised for local people. None of the, we got maybe 25% of any of the recreation they promised. And that in a historical perspective is terrible. But they've even gone back in the 1990s and said that the bulletins that they put out and I'm terrible about getting these numbers inverted, but I think it's 117-6 is a bulletin that showed all the future recreation around the lake. They got that thrown out. They convinced FERC, but there was no public outcry or input because we didn't know. And right now, it costs us as taxpayers in Butte County to host the lake, and that shouldn't be. Our police, fire, probation, jail, our wear on our roads, and remembering we receive no economic benefit because people pay a gate fee to state parks. People recreate in the state park, pay taxes at the marina on a state park. We get some recreational benefit, which is still way less than they promised us. It costs us over $7 million a year. There's 41,000 acres off the tax rolls, and that would be another over $7 million a year, a CPI of 1.74% annual for the last 50 years. And we're not talking about, we're saying nothing new got built. None of the little towns became little tourist traps. Nobody was using all those beautiful rapids with their kayaks and things. Nobody was up there fishing for the salmon that presidents would come to. We're saying it stayed just as stale as it was. Right now, we're subsidizing them. So I'd like to put it to the water contractors. All I want's a penny a day a customer. $3.65 a year times those 25 million people. Give us that 90-some million dollars and we'll be whole. They won't give us 12 million, but it's just in a perspective that the arrogance of the culture of DWR is such that we should be grateful that they have the lake in our backyard. They generate, we don't know how much, because, first off, they can't keep the turbines running. They got one broke now. They had terrible trouble keeping the turbines running. They burned down the powerhouse. We had to go rescue the people there. Just throw that in for you. They probably generate $100 million a year conservatively in electricity. And they wheel that, at peak times, and they sell it wherever to pump water over to Hatchapees and to move it here. And the only benefit Butte County gets is we look at the power lines. That, to me, is terrible. If we were a federal facility, they'd give you a payment in lieu of taxes for the land inundated. If you're a federal facility, they'd give you a share of the power. They would build the recreation up like Lake Shasta. We just get treated so badly, but it's their culture. You can meet at the top person, and they're empathetic and they want to help, but their culture and the water contractor's culture is, well, we don't want to be precedent setting. We don't want to be fair. We don't want to give them a penny a day a person. I'll take a penny a tree, to make us, because that veil of apathy comes down over our public, and they forget we subsidize that lake. We have less police, we have less fire, we have less libraries because the lake's in our backyard, and there's something morally wrong about that. And we're getting ready to meet with DWR again, try to get them to listen to us a little bit about this, try to get them to push this down to the water contractors that you ought to pay a little bit more money.
This speaks to the paradox of plenty, the resource curse we talk about on the show a lot. I mean, there's a place, Sinclair, Wyoming, that has one of the largest oil refineries, and they pay the highest price in gas. I mean, the water bills in Oroville are, one side of the street, it's one thing. The other side of the street, it's astronomical. And yet there's a dam right there with water. And, I've looked at some of the numbers too. It looks like the county has, paid for this dam basically of doing the operation of it. And you're right. When we voted, we were promised things, monorail, campsites, and all this recreation and tourism money.
Hundreds more campsites, 1,500 parking places in town. It was a devastation of Oroville when the dam was complete. People, fled the area because the construction boom was over. All the people that gave support to the construction workers left. They didn't build the parking lot. They didn't build the tram or train they were going to run to the base of the dam. They didn't start the hourly tours they promised. And the downtown of Oroville, it vacated. I mean, I lived here. I was growing. It just collapsed. Welfare rolls in the entire county tripled in 2 years, all directly attributable to the dam being complete. And then it compounded with loss of logging jobs and other construction jobs were complete. But that really was the catalyst for the downturn of the whole county in a way. And yet it was predicted in 2 studies. That's why when you go back and read the historic documents, somebody said, you open old scabs. No, go read, because if you don't study history, you're bound to repeat it. It said in these 2 studies, when they studied the dulls up in Washington or Oregon, and they studied Shasta, right here, they saw this economic downturn. Unless there was robust recreation, they predicted this would happen. And yet they did nothing to prevent it. And so, yeah, I'm a champion of that. I'm proud that I fight for it. And I'm proud to make people aware of it, because if they would speak as a united voice and we could stay together, they should somewhere hear us, at least be fair. We don't just pay us our out-of-pocket expenses. We'll eat the payment in lieu of taxes or something, but they won't do it.
So the large water districts, especially the ones, down south.
You can name them, Met, Westlands,
basically the ones that are buying land up here to assure their solvency. And is DWR affected by them especially? Because when I think about the turbines and the powerhouse, you said, when we talk about DWR, we do have union labor. We do have some good workers there that we're trying to highlight problems, and trying to manage up to the powers that be to say, hey, we've got some real problems here that need fixed, and they weren't good. They didn't have the ear of those leaders. Do you think those water districts have too much pull and too much, too much say in how things are going to be run, and what expenses get expensed out to fix certain things, and what doesn't? What the profits continue to come in?
It's a great question, but I think it falls a little bit differently than you're asking it. The union workers at the dam that retire and come talk to me are the ones that told me that they should never use the emergency spillway. It's only pinned to rock. There's fill in front of it. If they use it, it's made to fall over in case of a catastrophic event upstream, like Almanor failed or something like that, or it was a 1,000-year event and you want to save the dam. That institutional knowledge was lost to management, or they didn't want to hear it. Another great example of that was almost a catastrophe, right? The other example of that, they have a valve down there, and it's basically in a big, huge venturi. It doesn't spill all that much water, but a guy brought me the documentation. I read it on my desk that you should never open the valve all the way, because if you open a river valve with the diffuser rings in there, they're just simply rings in this big venturi like a tunnel, and this thing's shooting water out. It could create a wind up to 200 miles an hour. So some guy told those guys he was going to open it the next day. They don't go to work. 5 people get injured, which shows you that the people there weren't heard, because these were new, what they call engineers or white hats, came into work. Nobody was held accountable. Nobody went to jail. And by the way, who did the rescue? Butte County. One person's been permanently injured, and the other 4 were pretty severely injured because they got up to about 140 mile an hour wind. So
it created a hazardous.
And the second part of your question is the water contractors. They're over here paying the bills. So they're their own 29 Water Contractors, Inc. We have local water contractors, purveyors, that, thank God, have pre-1915 water rights. Butte County's a water contractor because we have some water we lease to some people. We can't use it, so that's why we lease it. Another story. But their influence is very deep and very wide, because they represent, I've heard, 25 to 27 million people. They represent billionaire farmers, and they have so much political clout, because Northern California, they have more representation in LA than we got from Sacramento to the Oregon border. So think about their political clout. There's 17 million people, I read recently, metropolitan serves. So all the representation gives them a political clout to bring to bear on a governor's office and a DWR. So there is. Does that explain it in a little better manner for you?
Yeah, it does. That really does. And I hear what you're saying about the emergency spillway, and it looks like there's some people in Oroville who maybe have a better idea of what safety looks like from a ground level than maybe DWR has from an internal level, because when people saw that there was, foliage and trees growing on that emergency spillway, they knew it was out of compliance. And there's been certain things that have been seen recently, whether it's cracks in the concrete or wet spots that are growing green grass on the side of the dam. Seems like some of the oversight is coming from, well, you and citizens in your district to kind of be a watchful eye there. But when you had those hazards, we also had elected leaders standing at the dam saying, we need to fill this thing all the way to the brim. And to me, that put some people in danger.
I don't disagree with that statement. I don't understand that. But from my perspective, the local citizens have been treated so poorly and not listened to for so long. I've tried to emphasize to DWR, if they're listening, you need to get an independent forensic study, and that's not former DWR employees or engineers, to look at this dam for your own interests and everybody's interests down south and our public safety. It has to be an independent forensic study done thoroughly, because if they built the spillway the way they did out of specs, you could generally perceive they might have built the powerhouse, the core, even the dam itself. As far as the wet spot, I've heard several explanations. The most realistic one is they were running the tractors up and over it on a haul road. They created a bunch of dirt and clay there, and instead of pulling that all out and redoing it, they built the dam all the way up. So it's probably not a 5-year or 10-year or 20-year problem, but it could be, because we don't know if they hauled the clay and the sand all the way into the other side where the water could come all the way through. Because the core of the dam is clay, then there's lighter material, then there's the heavy rock, and it's really thick and it's buttressed up and supposedly compacted 1,000%. Again, reading those reports, 1,000% more than they thought it would in the middle, and it had less leakage than they thought. But the explanation for the green spot has been, that's another terrible example of not just telling the truth. Hey, we think it's perched water because this clay ran over there. They tell us, oh, it's just the rain, or they tell us it's a natural spring, or they told us. They never get their story straight. Which brings up the latest thing. When I was sitting in a meeting and a poor lady saying, well, you can have concrete on the spillway that's really strong with rebar that cracks, or you can have concrete like your patio or your driveway that doesn't crack and it's not as strong. I've worked in construction most of my life. That's one of the biggest lies I ever heard in my life. I knew immediately that, just a layman, a small-time contractor would know they had either too much water, too much heat, bad cure, whatever. Bad cure. It doesn't mean it's structural. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world. But it doesn't mean, don't say BS to us, because we're not little kids. We're not podunk hicks up here in Northern California. You can give us some stupid explanation that, well, she didn't know, but whoever did that, they ought to be fired. I mean, you just get tired of it, because they're going to have to seal that stuff forever, right? I mean,
concrete's always curing.
Right, and it's already got little fine cracks in it, so you're going to have to cure it. And it isn't structurally going to fail, but it's not. That's the latest example of just I take affront to that.
But it brings up in mind that Florida walking bridge that fell and killed some people, and then the people noticed cracks on that concrete, and they were told the same thing. This was basically a government project, and then people noticed some cracks in it, and the thing failed. I mean, when they act like people being alarmed, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're talking about, stay in your lane, we're the contractors here. And we say, no, that doesn't seem right, even to the layman's perspective. And yet people, I think it is great that now people have got a real watchful eye on that and are paying attention.
I think that the construction that they did, even with the superficial cracking, is fine. I really, I'm no expert, no engineer. I just have a lot of common sense, and taking tours and seeing the detail they went to, like they should have done the first time, has been done. But there are cracks in the gates. There's problems with the radial arm gates. They don't want to talk about it. They need to fix that. They need to be open about it. They redact all this stuff because it's supposedly a Homeland Security thing, but it's not, I don't think. I think they just don't want to tell us. I think they'll be up there for a long time. Independent forensic study, no former DWR employees or engineers on it, and I think the public would be assured it's safe.
And that's a start. Yeah, it's a really
We
good
beat
start.
that to death, didn't we?
Well, Bill, one last thing before we move on from this. Do you think that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, should quickly move towards relicensing DWR?
No, I think the license should be totally redone. I just did an op-ed for the paper about it. It was actually easy to write for so many reasons. One thing is the passage of time. It's been a decade. Mm-hmm. And we actually the county sued them because a long time ago, before this ever happened, we said, you didn't take into consideration the climate change that's happening, this warm rain on snow. And every decade, we've got the Pineapple Express warm rain on snow. Well, everybody's thinking, here we are in 17, 18, and in 16, 17, but it did it in 15, 16. Mm-hmm. The lake was low because of years and years of drought. They filled the lake. Mm-hmm. It was warm rain on snow. So it's 2 years in a row, and that could happen more and more often. So the whole operations of the dam have obviously got to change. It creates another issue that they're not talking freely about, but they're starting to indicate there's not enough cushion between 813 and 900 to have 150% of snow and warm rain. There's just not enough room. And there's not enough way, because it's been projected you could get inflows up to 440,000 cubic feet per second. The most they can put down a spillway and probably break a levee somewhere would be about 250. So there's not enough cushion. The bathtub, it's going to go to the overflow, the emergency spillway. That's probably one of the reasons it's working. So they either got to figure out how to keep the lake way lower, which impacts everybody, or they're going to have to figure out how to put a lower spillway in or some sort of huge gate valve in the bottom. The latter is probably, talking to people, probably not going to happen because they don't think the integrity of the internal tunnels are good enough. Beyond that, they shouldn't issue the license because no matter what they choose to do in the operations, it should be more scientifically done. It should be done with everything available to us from satellites to lasers, and it should be climate-based, not water delivery based. Like the Army Corps is very linear. It's a certain date, certain amount of water. Garamendi, our congressman south of us, has told me in Washington, D.C., as a group of us actually, that they're doing that in Folsom. We should have that science here. Then the recreation impacts, because the lake is actually going to have to be held lower on these years, for sure, right? Then you're going to have to extend the lanes and make them wider. You're going to have to make it more accessible. You're going to have to build different campgrounds. These things, let alone, they've never addressed the impacts of our out-of-pocket expenses to the community of Butte County. And then the community of Oroville bought off on this special benefit plan. It's $1 million a year, no escalators for 50 years. It sounds like a really good deal until you realize that they expect you to use the water to go out, the money from there to go out and fix state parks land at the forebay, or go fix something up by the lake. It really irritates me that all of us fell into that. So for these reasons and more, the license should be renegotiated with an open, honest dialogue with local people, and we shouldn't be out of pocket, and we should get most of the recreation that was promised us. State Parks runs the parks up there. They're continually underfunded. So they can't open gates for my rural people that live in Forbstown or Berry Creek and want to go to the lake. The lake won't open until 9 o'clock. Try going bass fishing at 9 o'clock, right? Things like that. I could go on for hours. I mean, my God. There used to be, I'm going to throw this at you. Used to be 35,000 people come to downtown Oroville for boat races on the river. We don't get 35,000 people in any facility at the lake for boat races because they never built them. Where they ask them to go, the afterbay and the middle forebay, there's no shade structure. There's no restroom and shower facility. There's no vendors area. There's no camping there. And all of that they should be doing for our community. We're out of pocket. They should be building that stuff. I'm foaming at the mouth.
Well, let's
for the applause of our listeners.
We covered that one really well, I think. No
yeah,
doubt
let's
about the water policy.
beat that horse
well,
up.
Let's talk about Route 70, because I know that's another big priority of yours. That's something that you talked about as we got into the interview. This 13 fatalities here in 2017. I think it was another dozen or 2 dozen more in the couple of years before that. So it's been a problem for a while now. So talk to us about kind of the human side of this and what it means to you, and what this issue means on a personal level. The idea that you as a supervisor could help to make Route 70 safer for your constituents. And how do you do that is the other question.
Well, first off, it's very personal. I grew up on Stouse Avenue in Oroville, California. We had a family of 5 boys. His father was a principal, Mr. Jernigan, and his oldest boy retired and within days was killed on Route 70 when a drunk driver passed over the line on the bridges there and just flat took him out. And that's close to family. You know, you grew up with a family. That hurt. Then my planning commissioner was coming home from a play in Sacramento, leading a caravan of 4 or 5 cars doing 55 miles an hour, and a van came out of the darkness sideways, and him and his wife were severely injured in the hospital for several weeks, and it killed 3 people in the van. So I was, I'm lucky to serve on BCAG. You know, all the town of Paradise and the cities all have representation. All the board of supervisors sit there. They've elected me chair. I just got to tell you, they're all very supportive of anything we do on 70. I don't want to be egotistical or anything. It was not without their support we wouldn't do this. I was called by John Clark, the head of BCAG, and he says, Bill, I want you to put a face on 70. And we were brainstorming. I said, get me a map, and I want to cross where every death's been. And they did one better. They put the crosses for that year, and it was like 8. Well, by the end of the year, it was 13, 11 of which no drugs or alcohol are suspected. Simply 11 people died because somebody wanted to pass.
It's a bad road.
It's because there's 4 lanes, and in traffic study, they've proven that if you're on a 4-lane freeway or highway, and then you go to the 2-lane, you're impatient, you make mistakes, and a tragedy was close to home because one guy was going from Paradise to go to work at Caltrans, and a lady was coming home to Paradise, and unfortunately, she passed, and they both died right out by Dingerville, south there. So it's close to home. We are on track to receive about $168 million to do all the way to our border 5 lanes. So it'll start at Ophir. Everything that's not complete will be completed to our border. And that'll be 2019, 2020 is optimistic for the start. The other way, Caltrans has managed to get the money coming out of Marysville. So where you get necked down by the train trestles, that'll be done. The gap is between there. It's only funded for 3 lanes. Talking to Amarjeet of Caltrans, he's the head guy here in this district, really a great gentleman, really cares and passionate about this project. He said when they did this in Yuba City, it just simply moved the deaths to the 3 lanes. They had to come back. So we don't want to survey that, and there's some pushback down there. The local residents don't want the 5 lanes, but it's just too many cars. I counted one day there were 600 cars in the middle of the day driving down there and came the other way. So we're going to go to D.C. a couple of weeks here, around the 19th, and we're going to ask the federal government for like $47 million for that gap to make it 5 lanes all the way. I think it will improve the quality of life in Chico, Paradise, Oroville. I think it's a great thing. It'll make it safer for us to get to Sacramento. We'll pick up probably, so there'll be some people move here for the quality of life and work in Sacramento, which is a good thing. We're also looking, if possible, it's not a promise yet, we're looking at getting a train to come twice a day, morning and night, to Oroville, which to me, in my mind, would be a great way to improve tourism, because you're having the Appleseed Days up in Paradise, we could run buses there. If you're having a beer fest in Chico, we could run them there. If we're having something at Gridley, the fair, I think it would help the entire community. So BCAG is optimistically looking at that. It's not a done deal yet. I wish we could get the freeway done sooner. If we had a habitat conservation plan, which isn't very popular with the ag community for various reasons, we would be done 2 years sooner and save $30 million.
And so the projected time of completion is when again? would you
I'd say
guesstimate?
2024, you know how government works. 2025 probably, to be realistic. We'd like to get it done quicker, again starting in 2019 to 2020. Yeah, and it'll change the quality of our life up here in so many ways. I just look forward to it. You want to go see a Kings game? You know,
You're right, exactly.
Yeah, and I think about it. I think about how, you know, Chico lost air service and how much that impacts the roads going down to Sacramento and all those flights that now people are driving down, or elderly that need to get down to a flight, or now that they have to figure out a way to drive that, and a train, shuttle, something. I mean, air service back to Chico would be, you know, some of those would lighten the impact there, but definitely something that's been going on long before, even back when Chico did have air service. So, you know, good to see that the powers that be are getting it together and looking at.
You know, the saddest thing is the deaths. You know, 38 in so many years and 13 in 1 year. It's terrible, and I don't think it'll go away. The only other suggestion, I haven't talked to anyone yet, is a guy called me and says, "Why don't you just make it double lane all the way and put signs up, soon coming highway." He's got a good point. Maybe we need to look into it, but I don't know. What do you do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, infrastructure is something that people talk about a lot. I mean, certainly the roads get beat up. I mean, we talk about potholes. I mean, it's not nearly, of course, same issue as deaths or anywhere close to it. But I mean, you know, potholes annoy a lot of people. And I mean, you know, if you can relieve the pressure on those roads through some of the kind of the things you're talking about, probably a good idea. I would think in the long term.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I would hope so.
I hope we see it. Yeah. Nothing crazy happens.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I mean, we like to we talked about at the beginning of the show, we kind of ask these questions that are aside from the political stuff, and aside from the kind of policy issues and things like that. So this is one of those kind of like, who is Bill Connelly kind of questions. You like to ask those curveballs. So can you name someone that you look up to in the political realm, let's just say, either past or present? Who would be somebody that you really think is somebody to emulate, or that you, maybe a mentor of yours, or somebody that you know, or somebody you don't know, you just admire?
That, you know, I thought about that all day, and it's so much easier to have a historical perspective and say, oh yeah, I liked Lincoln, you know, because he did a lot of great things. But when you go back and read the history of it being created, he was as volatile as probably Trump. I hate to say that, but
yeah, suspended habeas corpus.
Yeah, he was. He was. You know, it's a tough one. I try to be my own person, and I have to say that with all honesty. I don't. You know, we all make mistakes, and we're all human. And I don't. You know, I just don't have anybody I'm looking up to or worrying about. I think, you know, I've been a lifetime Republican, but John F. Kennedy had a lot of conservative values and wanted to hold the Fed accountable, and went after the mob, and was a brave person in a lot of ways. And again, he wasn't a perfect person. I look up to that. Richard Nixon, is for as bad as he got at the end, opened China and did things. I'm pretty well read on the presidents. I mean, look, as crazy as Bill Clinton did, he did some things right, you know. I don't know. I think it's better to look way back. I think my favorite president that I would like to be like, and I wish I had his wealth and could be exactly in a lot of ways, was George Washington, because he took something and made it into nothing. He didn't become a king or a dictator. He retired. He left the country in pretty good hands. There is one governor that I really looked up to. His name was John Perkins. I know about him because he was a Mason from Oroville. He was elected to the governorship. We didn't have a prison system, really. We were really cruel. He formed a prison sentence. He balanced the state budget.
When was that?
In 1850.
It was the beginning part of the state's history.
Yeah, 1800s. And he went on to be a senator, federal senator, until he fell on the ice and hit his head. John
Perkins is the guy's name. Yeah. Never heard of John Perkins.
Governor Perkins.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah, he's my favorite politician, come to think of it. He was from Maine, came out here with nothing. Ran a store in Oroville, moved to the Bay Area, went on to be governor. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, I know, Aaron, we were talking before the show began. It's like, I got to ask about the marijuana stuff, right? Wasn't that one that you wanted to?
No, it's homelessness, but we
you want to ask about
talk
homelessness?
about weed.
All right,
I mean,
well, why don't you talk about the homelessness, then I'll talk about the marijuana.
well, we already talked about homelessness, so let's talk about marijuana.
Oh my God!
See the effects, see the side
it's
effects
it's a really high subject.
Well, I guess I could get right to it, Bill. We did Prop A in the county, and I think some of that was to try to quell illegal grows that were happening, and some of that from illegal citizens that were coming here and trashing our environment to try to make a quick end. And of late, I've been seeing some homes being taken and some liens put on people's property, and we're a poor district. There's not a lot of tax revenue to go around. And I read that it's actually costing the county some $20,000 for every home they're taking in based on the paperwork and everything else. So to the tune of almost $150,000 when you add up all the homes that we're getting liens on and pulling these people in front of judges. Was that the intent? Was to really to take down the property value, because now these people's homes are being sold for pennies on the dollar, and it has really, on an economic side, doesn't seem to make sense for a poor county to be going after, people's values and where people have their value, and it seems a little bit Orwellian, basically, of the government coming in and taking people's homes. Was that the intent of Prop A? And are we missing some of the things, and the fact that this may be hurting our economy, and the punitive measures we're taking on some people that are, whether they're out of compliance or whether they are doing something illegal?
I don't really see it quite that way, but can I back up just a little bit? I was sitting on the Board of Supervisors when we tried to meet with people and come up with some reasonable regulation. And the sheriff, the DA, county council, the CAO, 3 pro and 3 anti-marijuana people came up with an ordinance. And as I remember, we allowed up to 99 plants on larger acreages. You had to be a resident and so forth. The results of that was catastrophic environmental impacts. We had people from Texas, Arkansas, Nevada, wherever, in the county, degrading the land, growing 99 plants, making up scripts. You're supposed to have a script they're not prescriptions, right? They're recommendations, and it didn't work. And so we passed another ordinance, which they tried to overturn. As I remember, it didn't get overturned, or did, I don't remember. But where we're at now, overall, remembering I have probably more growers than any other supervisor, works very well. My complaint volume used to be 2 or 3 a day from middle of August through end of November. The people that lose their homes or have their land lien fall in 2 pretty general categories. One is the person that takes the risk to get cash up front and lease their land to somebody to grow. They took a risk. When they show up, they get notified. Then they come to the board and they say, oh, well, I didn't know what they were doing. Well, yeah, you did. You got paid cash up front. You got a substantial amount of money, and you didn't do it, so we put a lien on it. And it may be several years. The lien, we don't take their land right away. They have years to pay it. I mean, it'll be on transfer of the land. That's another misconception. The other one is that the people some of them come pay the fine too. Don't forget that.
I've heard that wow, they
just the cost of doing
wow,
business.
that's a lot of. I could never pay $1,000, $3,000.
It's $1,000. It's $500. It's nothing if you comply. If we show up and say, hey, you're allowed 12 plants, you got a medical recommendation, you got 20 acres, you get 150 feet, then that's plenty of however you want to make it, medicine or drugs or recreational for anybody. But because they're trying to make money, they make a conscious choice to get $1,000 a day fine from that point forward. And it's on them to prove that they've done it. And then we go back, and if it's close to harvest, they'll do it. It doesn't make sense to me. If somebody showed up to my house and said, you can't have your horse in the backyard anymore, it's going to cost you $1,000 a day, it'd be a lot cheaper to move the horse or get out of the horse business, right? It just doesn't make it. And I don't think it's going to degrade property values. I think the degradation of property values was when you have these yahoos moving in next to you, growing a bunch of weeds, shooting their AK-47 up in the air all night, and got pit bulls running around. And not to pick on pit bulls, some of them are nice, disclaimer, but you impact your neighbors with the smell, the dust. That has drove down property values. I've actually had people are starting to build really nice houses out in these areas because they feel it's under control. I don't use marijuana. As far as I know, nobody in my family uses it. But I don't care if you grow 2 or 3 plants. It never did bother me. It was the impactful indiscretions of people that caught us to where we're at. The other thing that's complicated, okay, so let me put, overall it works for me. I have people growing weed, and they're not bothering nobody, and they're probably growing more than they should, and they're all getting along. It's way different when they got arrogant in somebody's face and threaten them because I'm legal and I can do whatever I want. But overall, again, my call volume's down. Overall, my people aren't as concerned. I got something right now, people shooting at night and doing things because they're dealing out of their place. We're going to take care of that. But this huge gap in the law, it's still a class 1 narcotic federally. And there's nobody can tell me, and I tell the friends that I have that choose that lifestyle, that you're at risk. Because the feds could come. If you're making enough money and you have enough stuff, they can still come. The price told to me is down to $500 a pound in the county. A lot of people aren't going to do it anymore. Now, if you're doing it truly for your medicine and you're doing it for your own recreation, you probably will, right? But the commercial side of this is being wiped out by the legalization. And I know this is complicated, but think about this. Right now, if you're legal in Humboldt County, you can own 21-acre parcels because there's a loophole in a law that allow that, and that's happening right now. You're going to supply your own dispensary. It's going to be seed to dispensary. So the people that I represent that grow for a cash crop now are in a bad spot. They can't get nothing for it. They can't do seed. It's unlikely they're going to do seed to dispensary unless somebody opens one. And I think it's kind of curing itself. I would hope that we could find a guy's pitching tea. Somebody's talking about low THC hemp, which you can make rope and soap and clothes out of, and you can get cannabis oils, however you pronounce it, out of it. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's not something that's hallucinogenic or harms kids or does anything wrong, or even I think the federal government ought to stay out of the hemp. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with marijuana, but a lot less than I used to. And our intent wasn't to take people's homes. But what can you do if somebody knocks on your door and says, $500 if you don't abate by tomorrow, but if you do it today, I'll leave, and we won't be back. We might check if somebody complains. And they don't do it, and they take the $1,000 a day hit. It amazes me. Eventually, that money will come in the county coffers because eventually the land will sell. But it isn't like we kick them out of the house, just so you know. It's like we're behind the loan company. We're behind, you know what I mean? It's on sale. It takes 7 years or something like that. It's not instant.
I've heard, I know people in Cherokee. I know people out there that, said, yeah, oh boy.
In my district, Cherokee.
They're almost forceful. Boy, we get knocks on the door saying, hey, we'll give you $3,000. Let's grow here. And boy, if you don't, get with the program, you might get bullied around. So, yeah, I think the county needed to take measures. But, Northern California has been economically depressed for a long time. And some people figured out long ago a way to, create some wealth for them was to do that. There's huge homes up there. And, maybe the guy wasn't an art welder, or a welder.
Are you telling on somebody?
No.
Be careful now.
Different district.
I was thinking.
Different district. But, there has been people in times that the economy hasn't worked for them, and they figured out a way for the economy to work for them. Is that and sometimes sometimes legal, sometimes embracing the legality of it, and you see that with alcohol and prohibition. But now we have a different situation, and now the city of Oroville is looking at having a legalized commercial recreational marijuana and allowing some possibly dispensaries in the town. Do you feel like that is also part of something that would help the solution, or do you feel like that is going to be a negative impact on your district?
Okay, so all honestly, when the logging got pushed out, people moved to marijuana as a cash crop. But I think what you're going to see is the floor drop out of the price. This green rush that came was negative. And as far as if a dispensary opens in Oroville, if they do it, I hope they put it in a commercial area. And if they do, I bet they grow in the back and sell out the front. So I don't think it'll have this big economic impact, except very locally, if it works. That's how it works. I mean,
alcohol we do. I mean, we have the taxes, whether it's
so we're going to go in a
the bottling companies,
so
and the economics of it.
I'm a proud Catholic, and I drink whiskey, all right? And I pay a lot of taxes to do that. But does it overshadow all the impacts? I don't know. I think prohibition was probably a mistake, because there's something in some people's DNA they like to drink, right? So I don't have a good answer for you. We'll go in a big circle. I don't hate people. I love people. I mean, there's people who grow marijuana, and I'm mad at them because they're impacting our neighbor, but I don't hate them as a person. I try to, God, wake up. Your neighbor turns you in. Don't get your house repossessed, or don't get, your land taken away. But I just think it's immature at this time. I think within 5 years, this is all going to be solved. The federal government's either going to crack down or not, or they're going to be selling it, like you always said, like cigarettes.
Marlboro Purples, yeah.
Everybody's always said that. I just think right now we did the right thing. I got to tell you, overall, less people are negatively impacted. We've had less shootings, home invasions. The price is terribly low, which points to me, look, if you're a recreational user, you can grow what you need, or if you need it for medicine, you can do that. It's not perfect, because I hear there's people that can't get their medicine. They really believe in it. But it's working for me, and that's my honest answer. It works for me.
Well,
and my constituents, I hope.
we covered a lot of ground there, Bill. That was a quick hour. We went through a lot of the important issues, and we thank you for joining us on the show today and giving your perspective on some of those things. So.
You didn't ask me what I do for fun.
We didn't get to hardly anything. Really, I felt like we got to just scratching the surface with you. We'll have you back. We'll do more.
All right.
As we go along. Well, thanks again to
it was a pleasure.
Bill
and
Connelly.
I'd like to thank you for challenging me.
Oh no, it was great for answering our questions.
Because when we don't actually align, a challenge is a way to make your mind work.
And
there's a robust conversation, you can get to a better solution.
And there's a lot of different opinions here in this county. So it's great that we have a representative who's willing to listen to different viewpoints and embrace them. So that's really great. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again to Bill Connelly for joining us on this week's show. Don't forget, NorCal News Now. Of course, we're available wherever you download your podcast. So check us out and subscribe. And we can also be found on Facebook at NorCal News Now, where you can post your comments and suggestions for upcoming podcast topics and guests. So we want to know all about that. Thank you all for listening in, and we'll be back at you soon with another episode of NorCal News Now. So long.